In today's video of Tales from the Vault, I'm going to be going outside of my hometown of Hancock County and be taking you into the story of the largest search party in the United States that happened in the Great Smoky Mountains concerning 6-year-old Dennis Martin. So, in today's episode of Tales from the Vault, we will be venturing outside of Hancock County, my hometown, and venturing into the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in June 1969, Father's Day weekend, in the case of Dennis Martin, the 6-year-old little boy who went missing in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and therefore the largest search party was ever created in the United States to help search for him. This is kind of a lengthy story, so I'm going to try to get as much of it in as I can. I may speak a little fast because I've gotten it written down here because I've gotten this from like 3 different sources and I've written it down and tried to organize everything. So, with that being said, let's get into this story. It is virtually impossible that we will never know what happened to Dennis Martin, said Clay Jordan, Deputy Park Superintendent. Human nature being what it is, we want to have answers to something. We want an explanation. But it's become one of the most enduring mysteries of the Smoky Mountains. The day couldn't have been better for camping. Bill Martin didn't see a single cloud in the sky as he sat down on a knoll in Spence Field that Saturday afternoon. Martin, an architect from Knoxville, Tennessee, had driven to Cades Cove with his father, Clyde, and his 2 sons, Doug, 9, and Dennis, age 6. Dennis would turn 7 in 6 days. The weekend camping trip marked another family tradition dating back more than half a century. Martin men helped settle the cove, which would be Cades Cove, which is one of the most traveled areas in the Smoky Mountains. Tilling the rich bottomland soil at the start of every spring and driving cattle up the mountain to range on the tall grass in the treeless meadows like Spence Field, known as mountain balds. Every June, fathers and sons would trek uphill and set out salt licks that to last the herds until the fall drive down the mountain to the market. The creation of the park, Smoky Mountains, in 1934 ended that farming, but the tradition lived on as a Martin family reunion. This year marked the first time that Dennis Martin was a part of the trip. Denny, as his family called him, was small but strong. About 4 feet tall, 55 pounds, with dark brown eyes and wavy brown hair. He was about 6 months behind in his age group in school, but field smart and fearless. He never camped away from home before, but knew how to handle himself in the woods. Carried along on hikes before he learned to walk, he often led the way on trails, walking so fast adults couldn't keep up. Saturday began with breakfast at nearby Russell Field, where the family had spent the night, and a hike to Spence Field, where other Martin relatives waited at the camping shelter. With lunch eaten and the dishes done, adults settled down at the knoll to talk and to enjoy the view, while Dennis, Doug, and 2 more boys ran and played in the fields. Dennis was easy to pick out, wearing a red t-shirt, green shorts, and Oxford shoes. Spence Field sits about 4,800 feet above Cades Cove and runs east and west along the Appalachian Trail on the Tennessee-North Carolina line. Tennessee to the north, North Carolina to the south. A clear day yields views that spans miles. Steep slopes, jagged ravines, and tangled masses of laurel and rhododendron vines teeming with copperheads and rattlesnakes lie below. Bears and bobcats mark their territory on the trees along the trails, beside furrows dug by wild hogs scrounging for roots. The bears that summer had been unusually bold and hungry after a drought the previous year that left the ground mostly bare of acorns, the backbone of their usual diet. Just before 4:30 p.m., the boys put their heads together, whispering as the adults watched. Then they scattered. Doug and the others to the south, Dennis to the north and west, toward the Tennessee side. The grown-ups chuckled and waited. Bill Martin and the others jumped in pretend surprise when Doug and the two boys burst out of the brush behind them with shrieks and laughters. After a few minutes, maybe 2 or 3, by the father's count, no more than 5, he insisted, came the question, "Where's Dennis?" Doug and the other boys lost sight of him when he headed west. They didn't want his red shirt to give him away. Father and grandfather called his name. He didn't answer. The group fanned across the field, splitting up to check the trails. Hours ticked by. Clyde Martin, the grandfather, hiked to the Cades Cove Ranger Station to report Dennis missing. Bill Martin crossed paths with a park naturalist headed up the trail from Cades Cove. He'd seen nothing. Clouds gathered overhead as a breeze swept across the field. In the distance, thunder rumbled. The storm broke with a sudden fury, dumping nearly 3 inches of rain over the next few hours that sent the family scurrying to the shelter and turned the trails to rivers of mud. High winds drowned out the calls for Dennis, along with the change of hearing any answer. Dennis walked away with nothing but the clothes on his back and the shoes on his feet. No hat, no rain gear, nothing to protect him. Temperatures that night dropped into the low 50s. Chilling campers to the bone, the family ventured from the shelter occasionally to call his name, to no avail. To be a child caught out in that kind of storm in those kinds of temperatures without shelter, it's not a good thing. Their system isn't built like adults. Hypothermia sets in quick, said Dwight McCarter, a retired park ranger who helped track more than a dozen people lost in the mountains. McCarter and the other rangers assembled for the search and rescue duty at 5 a.m. the next day, June the 15th. Getting to the scene took most of the morning as the rangers struggled past flooded streams, standing water, and washed out roads and trails. Park officials used trucks and jeeps to haul searchers to Spence Field. By afternoon, more than 240 people had gathered in the scene, from rangers to local rescue squad volunteers to Boy Scout troops, with more on the way. The crowd included Dennis's mother, Violet, who learned at church of her son's disappearance. "I have a feeling we're going to find him," she said. "Maybe God sent this ordeal to us so we could appreciate things more." For every truck and volunteer, McCarter saw a potential sign of Dennis lost. Trampled, washed away, churned to mud beneath a tire. He'd grown up in the Smokies, taught from childhood how to recognize the broken twigs, the disturbed ant trails, and other clues that point to a lost traveler's track in the wild. "All those people," he said. "That's a lot of footprints. All those trucks. We searched and searched and searched. Something should have been found. But you have to know what to look for. Get just a few of us trackers in first and give us a chance." Park officials later acknowledged bungling the search from the start with too many overeager volunteers, too many inexperienced eyes, too many careless feet. Nominal commanders on the scene soon lost control. Overwhelmed by the number of searchers, some volunteers had never set foot in the park before. Some didn't know how to use a compass. Everyone kept feeling that the boy would be found in the next hour, and it was probably this reason why the search organization did not keep pace with the rapid manpower buildup. Keith Nielsen, who went on to serve as park superintendent, said, "We failed to realize the need for quick organization. It was the most intensive and large-scale search that any of the park personnel had ever participated in." Searcher ranks ballooned in the days that followed. More volunteers drove up in more vehicles with water, food, and supplies. The details of the case, a missing child, a sudden disappearance, a race against the elements in the nation's most visited national park, made for national headlines. President Richard Nixon notified park officials he'd be keeping up with the search, prompted by his friend, U.S. Senator Howard Baker of Tennessee. Airmen from McGee-Tyson National Guard Base in Knoxville arrived along with the rescue squad members from across Tennessee, North Carolina, Kentucky, and Georgia. Green Berets on training exercise in the near Nantahala National Forest showed up to help. By Monday, June 16th, the crowd topped 300 people. By the next day, more than 365 people. Rain continued throughout the week, and rangers hauled in gravel to shore up the roads rendered impassable by flash flooding. By the seventh day, searchers' rank peaked at 1,400 people. One volunteer accidentally pew-pewed himself in the leg. Another broke an arm when he fell off of a bridge. Helicopters flew in, but spent much of the time grounded by rain and fog. Once airborne, spotters found the leafy tree canopy impenetrable. Search dogs sniffed the woods in vain. The searchers weren't squeamish. Men and women hacked their way into the deepest thickets, some so dense that they had to belly crawl to get through. A crew of Green Berets ran out of rations and barbecued a rattlesnake. One of the only clues discovered came Tuesday, the fourth day of the search. A pair of hikers stumbled across a faint set of small tracks along a water break in the Eagle Creek area, about a mile below Spence Field. They followed the prints about 300 yards before losing the trail at the edge of a stream. One appeared to be a bare footprint, the other a shoe print, maybe from an Oxford, maybe from a tennis shoe, each about the size of a child. Rangers made casts of the prints. The Martins said the prints looked too big to be from Dennis. Park officials dismissed the tracks as left by Boy Scouts from a search party. Green Berets reported they had already made a sweep. McCarter thinks his bosses gave up too early. They didn't find tracks from a bunch of kids, he said. They found tracks from one kid. He was by himself, and none of the scouts who'd been through there were barefoot. That would be reasonable, that he might have hit this trail. If it was dark, this looks like a trail. If you didn't have a flashlight and you didn't know the terrain, and you're a 6-year-old, he pauses, you'd be awful young to have to make those kinds of decisions on your own. Bill Martin took to the air in a Tennessee Patrol helicopter to call his son from a bullhorn, to no avail. He didn't hear from him. Dennis would have turned 7 that Friday, June the 20th. Sunday, June the 22nd, marked the 8th day. Researchers had covered about 56 square miles of ground, all with no results. The odds Dennis could have survived this long, with no food in his pocket, no coat on his back, no ripe berries on the vines, dwindled hourly. On June the 25th, the Martin family headed home. On June 29th, park officials suspended all major search operations. A handful of rangers continued efforts until September the 11th, when the park declared the search closed. The search cost 13,420 man-hours and roughly $70,000, equivalent to about $500,000 today. We've done everything we've known to do, said Lee Sneeden, the chief op ranger. The Martins offered a $5,000 reward for anyone with information leading to Dennis. Bill Martin told reporters he suspected his son might have been kidnapped. I've got nothing to go on, no evidence, the father said, but it's a possibility and the only one we have that the boy is still alive. The case took a new twist when Harold Key, a state highway engineer from Middle Tennessee, approached park officials more than a month after Dennis had disappeared. Key said he visited Cades Cove with his family that weekend from Carthage and wandered into the woods hoping to see a bear. He couldn't retrace his steps, but felt sure he had been somewhere near Spence Field that Saturday, sometime between 6 and 7 p.m. When we got about half a mile or maybe 3/4 of a mile from the car, we heard a scream. A terrible scream. An enormous, sickening scream. We couldn't tell which direction it came from, but it sounded like it came from higher up on the mountain to me. Minutes later, something moved in the bush. I looked across the creek and saw a man in the bushes, Key recalled. I couldn't tell much about him because he was going down the creek toward the cars. He was definitely trying to keep from being seen. I thought maybe he was a moonshiner. Key said he crossed the creek and found what looked like a crudely drawn map on a scrap of paper about where the man would have been. When he came back, he noticed the only other car parked at the roadside, an older model white Chevrolet, was gone. He didn't learn about Dennis until the next day. At first, he kept quiet. But I got to thinking that maybe that scream had something to do with that boy's disappearance. Rangers ultimately concluded Key must have been out at Sea Branch, a small stream that crosses the south leg of Cades Cove, Loop Road, west of Rowan's Creek. 5 miles from Spencefield, closer to 7 or as much as 9 miles away by trails. To cover that distance in a space of 2 hours or less would have taken Olympic effort. That's without accounting for a kidnapper who would have had to creep up on Dennis in an open meadow on a sunny day. Key stuck to his story until his passing at the age of 94. Rangers and agents of the FBI's Knoxville office ran down dozens of tips, including one from a woman who claimed she had seen a boy who looked like Dennis in the backseat of a car passing in Knoxville. Nothing held up. On July 3rd, McCarter and a small crew of remaining searchers reported a stench on the wind as they headed up the West Prong Trail below Spence Field. It was just a smell that wasn't an animal. I don't think, he recalled, I'd smelled decay and barren deer. They smelled different. A deceased crow, park officials radioed back. That area was checked already. Move on. McCarter questioned that call to this day. It wasn't a crow, he said. I've smelled decomposing crow. This was worse. The spot would have been downwind from the water break at Eagles Creek, where hikers found the child-sized tracks 4 days into the search. In July 1985, a man approached McCarter with a story of finding a child-sized skeleton in ground disturbed by uprooted tree in Big Hollow near Tremont years earlier. The man said he didn't report it because he had been ginseng hunting illegally. A crew of 30 men searched the hollow to no avail. In the 1990s, a man contacted park officials for details about the case. He thought he might be Dennis Martin. He wasn't. Bill Martin passed in 2014, never knowing what happened to his son. The family hasn't discussed the case publicly since the search ended. Armchair detectives still debate the case, whether Dennis was kidnapped, mauled by a bear, stumbled off a cliff in the dark, or passed of hunger, thirst, or exposure. Jordan, the park's deputy superintendent, said he doesn't expect to find an answer. Time, weather, scavenging animals, and the forest itself have by now erased any surviving clues. It can be really hard to imagine that you can have so many searchers in the woods and not be able to find somebody, he said. So you have to look for another explanation, because I know it can happen so easily. I think he wandered off in the wrong direction, ended up on the wrong trail, and then just kept going. Rescuers across the globe still use Dennis Martin's disappearance as a training exercise. The national park overhauled its search and rescue procedures in the wake of the case, and the lessons learned have saved lives for the past 50-plus years. By Jordan's estimate, searchers in the Smokies have failed to find only 4 other missing persons since. You now have people searching in the Australian outback who know the name Dennis Martin, Jordan said. I would say That was one of those signature moments. The science of search management that has evolved since 1969 is really a lasting legacy that would go beyond all of our lives and help other people all around the world. Park officials and the last men who tried to track him doubt he lived past the first night. As of today, it is still the largest search in the history of America. By June the 22nd, 56 square miles of ground had been covered. More than 1,000 searchers continued to look until June the 26th. The area where Dennis disappeared is marked by steep slopes and ravines. Wild animals such as copperheads, bears, feral hogs, and bobcats inhabit the area. Dennis Martin, one of the most mysterious missing child cases that happened in Tennessee or the nation, is still unsolved. Some people figured he was kidnapped. Others say he got lost and disoriented in the woods. And a select few imagine a fate far worse. To this day, nobody knows the truth. The National Missing and Unidentified Persons System is a national database that keeps track of missing people across the country. Dennis Martin was one of the first names on it, and it's still a name they have never taken off. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released an age progression photo to show what Dennis might look like 50 plus years later. It is important to realize it is not a portrait, it's just an approximation. So, that is the story of 6-year-old Dennis Martin, who went missing in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park here in Tennessee, that was never recovered. Never any word. It's been 50 plus years later. Like I said, this is a story I've heard all my life. I wish to this day that there had been some resolve, something that had come about. Like, his father is gone. He never got peace from what happened. And that breaks my heart. But I hope you enjoyed this story. Like I said, I ventured outside of Hancock County this time and into the Great Smoky Mountains. And there's lots of other stories about the Great Smoky Mountains that I can tell. But like I said, I hope you enjoyed this. I think I'll end this here. Hope you guys like, subscribe, hit that notification button, and to share this video. Until next time, Tales from the Vault. See you on the flip side. Bye.